Chapter 45. There was one time of the year especially indwelled by the goddess, the month of her possession. Ishtar played a part in other holy days and festivals, but it was this one time of year that her mythology, her passions, her frustrations and anguish, her desires and longings, her rituals and her possessions, of multitudes saturated Mesopotamian culture for an entire month. It was during those days that her spirit seemed everywhere. It was then that the people of Mesopotamia not only worshipped her, but in their passions became as her. They cried out for her lover Tammuz, as if it were her crying out through them. They yearned as if it were her yearning in them. They moved in procession, as if it were her moving in procession. So the prophet Ezekiel was given a vision in which he saw the women of Israel weeping, as if it were Ishtar weeping for Tammuz. The people became her channels. The goddess of possession possessed them. It was at that time of year her mythology exerted an amplified power to infiltrate daily life. They were the days when, according to her mythology, she and Tammuz were separated. He was in the underworld, the land of the dead, and she was in the land of the living, seeking to be reunited. Rituals, observances, festivals and processions dedicated to the goddess and the object of her desire took place throughout the Middle East. One could hardly escape it. During those days, the air was especially filled with her presence. The 29 days. What would happen if the goddess returned to the modern world? Would she again mark out and lay claim to a similar time of year? Would she again create rituals to be performed during that time, observances to be kept, festivals to be celebrated, and processions to be followed? And would her spirit again, especially indwell those days? The answer is yes. That is exactly what she would do. Upon her return to Western civilization, the goddess set out to mark and lay claim to a space of time every year as her own, a time that her spirit could especially inhabit. As she was the goddess of pride, the time would be crowned with the name Pride. The time of the goddess and the object of her passions lasted approximately 29 days. So 1 month of the ancient Middle Eastern calendar was especially given for the possession of the goddess, her lover, and her mythology. Rites, festivals, and processions took place from the month's opening to its last day. So the mystery would ordain that the spirit of the goddess would again seek to lay claim to a similar space of time in modern times, 1 month each year, on the calendar of the civilization she was now seeking to possess. And so it happened, in exact accordance with the ancient mystery. The sacred month. In the wake of Stonewall, gay activists established marches and parades to celebrate homosexuality, and then an entire week, Gay Pride Week. But in ancient times, the goddess laid claim to an entire month of observances and parades, and so Gay Pride Week was then transformed into Gay Pride Month. To increase its acceptability and further popularize it, its name would later be shortened to Pride Month. So as in ancient times, the spirit of the goddess was given an entire month to indwell and possess, and as in ancient times, that month would be known for its processions and parades, observances, rituals, and the increase of her power. It was a strange phenomenon. the celebrating of that which once occupied the forbidden corners of society had come to permeate and dominate American and Western culture. America and other nations of the West were now devoting an entire month to honor, praise, and celebrate a form of sexuality that a little while earlier had been nearly universally viewed as a form of immorality. Now it was being treated as sacred. A strange veneration, equally strange. Nations were placing the celebration of this mode of sexuality above their own holidays. Nations would typically devote a day to the celebration of their birth or independence, but they were now devoting almost 30 times that amount of time in order to celebrate a particular form of sexuality. And it was happening all over the world. Nations with little in common were now celebrating the same holiday, giving homage, veneration, and praise, all to the same thing, and to that which they had only a little while earlier deemed to be sin. What could account for such a strange and dramatic transformation? It was more than natural. It was the work of the gods. In all of history, there had never been a phenomenon quite like it, and yet Pride Month was the resurrection of the ancient month, of the goddess possession. So now again, as in ancient times, an entire month was given to the indwelling of a spirit that blurred and broke the lines of gender, that feminized men and masculized women, that turned the one into the other and caused them to be paraded in the city streets. Finding Tammuz. When in the ancient year did the days of the goddess and her lover fall? They fell in the summer. It was the ancient month of Tammuz. Since it was based on the lunar cycle, its timing with regard to the Western Gregorian calendar would of course oscillate. Tammuz can begin in June or July, but 70% of the time it begins in June. Jameson, Fawcett, and Brown Commentary on the Whole Bible, published in 1871, says this on the month and of its ancient celebrations. An annual feast was celebrated for him in June, hence called Tammuz in the Jewish calendar. The Bible commentator Joseph Benson, who lived in the 18th and early 19th century, wrote this of the month and its worship. Tammuz, which also is used for the 10th month, reckoning from the autumnal equinox, that is, the month of June, and Tammuz, as the object of worship, expresses the solar light in its perfection, as in the summer solstice. Benson brings out the link between the month of Tammuz and the summer solstice. There is only one month in which the summer solstice takes place each year, the month of June. Junium. Saint Jerome, who lived in the Roman Empire at the time of its conversion from paganism to Christianity, was most famous for producing the Vulgate, the Latin translation of the Bible. But he was also known for writing biblical commentaries. One of these was on the book of Ezekiel. It was that book that contained the description of the Hebrew women in the spirit of Ishtar, weeping for Tammuz. In commenting on the passage, Jerome drew from his knowledge of the observances, rituals, and practices that were still being performed at the time of his writing. His original words in Latin read, Quem nos adonidem, interpretati sumus, et Hebraeus et Cyrus hermo Tammuz vocat. Adonis is called Tammuz both in Hebrew and Syria. Then he writes of the god's death and the time of its occurrence. In mense junio occusus, in the month of June, is killed. So Jerome identifies the time of Tammuz's death as the mense junio, the month of June. He continues, Eudem junium mensem, eodem appellant nomine, et anniversariam ei celebrante solemnitatem. They call this month of June by the same name and keep an annual festival in his honor. Thus, according to Jerome and other observers of this day, the month of Tammuz was equivalent or most equivalent to Junium Mensem, this month of June. Tammuz corresponds with Junium and Junium with Tammuz. June is also identified as the month in which the annual festival takes place. Thus the identification of Tammuz with June, and thus June as the month of the annual celebration, linked to the goddess and her mythology, are ancient ones going back to the Romans, those who gave the month of June its name. The repossession of June. So if the goddess returned, what would happen to the month of her possession? The calendar of the modern world was based not on that of ancient Mesopotamia or the Middle East, but on that of Rome. We might then expect that of all months, she would choose the month of the summer solstice. We might expect that she would choose the month that more than any other inaugurated the days of Tammuz, her lover, Junium Mensem, the month of June. So we would take special possession of it. She would turn June into the time of her channeling, and since June had long been known as the time of weddings, the joining of man and woman, its modern transformation would be all the more dramatic. And as June became Pride Month, and Pride Month became June, as America and the West turned away from God and Christianity, the ancient month returned to the goddess. And as in the ancient times, the summer solstice and the days it inaugurated marked the time of the goddess's processions and parades. The summer liturgies. The festival of the summer month, of which Jerome and others wrote, involved rituals of lamentation and mourning over Tammuz's descent. We know that women were involved in those rituals, but it was not women alone. The Asinnu, the Karlu, and the Gala, Ishtar's cross-gendered priesthood, the men who dressed as women, were given a central part in the rituals. They would lead the lamentations by chanting and wailing in the female dialect. So now, in the revived processions of June, men would again take on the attributes of women. After nearly 2,000 years, the month that Jerome called Junium had revived its pagan function as the vessel for the annual festival. June would again serve the instrument of the goddess's power, the time when her spirit would especially possess the culture in which she dwelled. Festival of Inversion. The month of Tammuz, or Junium, centered on the mythology of Ishtar and her lover, but it was not about their union. It was about their separation. It was about obstruction of passion and desire. So the modern observances of June, as the commemoration of the Stonewall riots, were born of the same thing, frustration and anger over obstruction of desire. The parades themselves were aimed at tearing down all walls of resistance and to remove the hindrances separating desire from its fulfillment. Beyond this was a strange coming together of the goddess's observances. The timing of Pride Month hearkened back to the days when Tammuz and Ishtar were separated, and thus to the theme of separation, the separation of man from woman and woman from man. It was thus the perfect time for the celebration of homosexuality, lesbianism, and other alternate sexualities, but the revelry of Pride Month harkened back to the goddess's celebratory festivals. In Pride Month, the two came together. The modern observance was not a lamentation over the separation of male and female, but a celebration. It was now a festival that celebrated the separation, a month-long holiday that rejoiced in the man. in men separated from women, and women separated from men. In this the rites of the goddess converged into a festival of inversion. The licentious rites of midsummer, and yet the ancient rites and festivals observed in the month of Tammuz as separation were also noted for their sexual licentiousness. One commentator writes this of the festival as practiced in ancient Phoenicia or Lebanon. The women of Gebal used to repair to this temple of Aphrodite Ishtar in midsummer to celebrate the death of Adonis or Tammuz, and there arose in connection with this celebration those licentious rites. The writer places the licentious rites at midsummer, the summer solstice in June. The 2nd century Syrian writer Lucian gives his own account of the rites and observances of June. I saw too at Byblos a large temple, sacred to the Biblian Aphrodite Ishtar. This is the scene of the secret rites of Adonis Tammuz. He goes on to describe how the women would have shaved their heads in homage to the slain god Adonis Tammuz, and that those who refused to do so had to offer their bodies to strangers as prostitutes and give the proceeds to the goddess as a sacrifice. The early church historian Eusebius writes of the same temple of Venus, Aphrodite, Ishtar, and Phoenicia, on which the rites and processions of June were centered. Devotees of impurity destroy their bodies with effeminacy. Here men undeserving of the name forgot the dignity of their sex. Here too unlawful commerce of women and adulterous intercourse with other horrible and infamous practices. The Temple of Venus. The ending of the Midsummer Festival and processions of the goddess is implicit in the writings of the early church historian Eusebius and Socrates Scholasticus. Both record the clearing away of the shrine of Venus, Aphrodite Ishtar in Lebanon by the Emperor Constantine. He likewise demolished the Temple of Venus at Akaka on Mount Libanus and abolished the infamous deeds which were there celebrated. The temple or shrine of Venus and Apaka on Mount Libanus served as the source of the festivals of which Saint Jerome wrote and identified with June. So the festivals of June or Tammuz came to an end. Thus one of the most overlooked signs of the conversion of Western civilization to Christianity was the ending of month-long celebrations of midsummer, with its June parades and gender-crossing spectacles, and thus the return of the month-long celebration of midsummer, the revival of the June parades, and reappearance of the gender-crossing spectacles was not an accident. It was a sign of the dechristianization of Western civilization and its subsequent repaganization. The Temple of Venus was ultimately the Temple of Ishtar. The ending of the June processions was linked to its destruction, and its destruction was linked to the exile of the goddess and the gods. So if the hallowing of June, the annual festival, the parades and the processions of the cross-gendered should return, it would be a sure sign not only of the dechristianization and repaganization, but of that which accompanies both, the return of the goddess and the return of the gods. The return of Junium. For Christians of the first centuries, such as Eusebius, the rites of June and their associated practices could only be seen as celebrations of immorality. For Christians of the 20th and 21st centuries, the revived rites of June and their related practices would be seen in the same way. They were not alone. Many others in ancient and modern time would view it similarly. For those not swept up in its fervor, June's transformation was a mystery. The month-long celebration seemed almost religious in nature, and it was. It was the return of an ancient religious observance. The sacred procession of June was not a strange phenomenon to a pagan culture. The sight of parades in which men dressed as women and women as men, and the distinctions of gender were blurred was, to pagan eyes, a familiar one. Their return was the natural outcome of the repaganization of Western civilization that had begun with the turning away from God had now given birth to the rites and processions of the pagan summer festivals. The parades had vanished with the gods. Their disappearance was a sign that the god had departed. The return of the parades was thus the sign of the opposite. The gods had returned. And the rising magnitude of the summer celebration was a sign of the rising power of the gods and the intensifying hold they were exerting on America and the world. The departure from God had allowed the pagan mystery man to rise from the dead. June was reverting to its pre-Christian state. Junium was returning. Month of apostasy. In the Bible, the month of Tammuz is known for something else. It was in Tammuz that the nation of Israel first turned away from God and to the realm of gods and idols, to the golden calf. It was June that most often began that Hebrew month, and so now again, June would mark the returning. June would mark the turning away of another nation and another civilization from God and to the gods. It was the month of apostasy, that of a nation and that of a civilization. What happened to June is another reminder that whenever a nation or civilization, or for that matter, a life turn away from God, it will never remain neutral. It will never stay empty. It will become indwelled by something else, something other than God. It will become inhabited by the gods, those who had taken part in the removal of prayer and the word from American public life would not have imagined what it would lead to. But the empty house could not stay empty. A civilization that turned away from its worship of God. Now the sacraments of the different worship had come in. The door was left open. The house was found empty. The spirits came in. The gods returned, and with them their holy days. Is it possible that behind the sign that now appears in everything from corporate logos, video games and children's cartoons to t-shirts, coffee mugs, cereal boxes, and the flagpoles of American embassies, a sign lifted up by people of every background, by leaders and nations, lies an ancient deity? And is it possible that this sign that now covers the world actually serves as an instrument of that deity to the accomplishing of purposes unknown to those who bear it?